folks. How are y'all doing? Doing much by myself, I do say so. Hope y'all are having a good week. Very excited to be here. It's been a little while since we've done any of these Griscom streams, so I'm always happy to hang out and hear what is on y'all's mind. Feel free to jump into the chat and ask any questions, share any thoughts that you do have, because these are a little bit different than the main show where Matt and I, go through a couple stories and do an interview. These are supposed to be a bit more interactive. Um, I think. I think that it's something we should definitely be doing a little bit more going into this election, which I feel like is a very, very confusing and difficult time for many of us out there. But what's up, friends? Good to hear from our buddy Marcos. How are you doing, brother? I'm doing very well. I've got a couple of stories here. We can talk about the debate if people want to. Last we spoke, it was right before it. So if anyone has anything on that, I'm happy to chat about it. If we're feeling sort of done and exhausted with it, I definitely understand that as well. Um, I know there was, I think from people who watched it, it seemed pretty clear that the sense was that, Trump lost it. I wonder how much of an effect that's going to have in the general population because even talking to kind of family and friends and folks who don't follow politics really, really closely, I think a lot of people sort of skipped it, which I was a little surprised by. Um, yeah, and I mean, I think probably the most consequential thing from the debate would be this kind of extremely nasty right wing lie that we've been seeing about Haitian immigrants eating people's pets. I mean, that's as bottom of the barrel kind of reactionary garbage as you're going to get. And I'm not the first one to complain about these kind of things, but I'll tell you, I was loading up Twitter this morning looking for some things to talk about today. And like the first video I saw was about a guy kind of harassing a trans person on the street. And, I don't think it's a small thing that the hate machine is all dialed up going into this election when those forces are very much backing Donald Trump. But let's get to some cues here. I know we have some in the Discord as well. So let's get it started. Our good friend Byron Man 12, always appreciate hearing from you, brother, says, do you think that Dan Osborne will caucus with the Democrats? He might feel it is more advantageous to caucus with the GOP in order to get reelected if he wins in November. Well, I think for folks who don't know, we're talking about the independent Senate candidate in Nebraska. I think one of the most exciting uh, potential elections in the country right now because it really does put up a different kind of politics than what we were sort of getting from the Democratic Party. Certainly, the Democratic Party under somebody like Kamala Harris. Um, Osborne does really represent a strong working class independent politics. And I think one thing that has been very effective about his campaign is actually just being able to bring certain kinds of messaging, political kind of messaging, without all the baggage of being associated with the Democratic Party. I think it's a very interesting test case for a different version of politics. Now they'll be limited with money, but if nothing else, if it makes the Republicans sweat a bit, that's probably a good thing in and of itself. But Byron Man says, "Do you think Dan Osborne will caucus with the Democrats if they're elected?" Um, I would reckon so. Right? I mean, I think it'd probably be hard to caucus with the Republican Party, just given how it operates politically. Certainly, when it comes to working rights issues, I mean, like Dan Osborne is running a campaign on being pro worker, right? And the Democratic Party certainly isn't a pro working class party. But the Republican Party has very little to no interest in doing anything for working class people other than maybe aesthetically trying to appeal and present itself as a working class organization. So I think, on a tactical level, on a strategic level, I think if Dan Osborne in Nebraska is elected, um, he would probably be caucusing with the Democrats, much like Bernie Sanders did. But I think more importantly, it'll be to see if Dan Osborne is able to win in Nebraska, which I think, is a there's a chance for it, which I think is really exciting, and people should be following that election a lot closer than they are. Um, but yeah, and as always, folks, these Griscom streams are a little bit more casual. We hang out, tell some stories, I answer some questions. So get those questions in. We do appreciate super chats very much, but also take super chats. I also highly suggest, if people haven't, go and listen to the interview that we did with Nick French and Neil Meyer on the Tuesday episode this week. With Matt and I interviewed them, two really great writers, and we talked about democratic socialism and what's next for the movement. Because it's a very difficult time, I think, strategically. We're feeling a lot of the frustration of the kind of ebb of the Bernie presidential campaigns, and a lot of the disappointment that we've seen from some of the major elected officials, people like AOC. So it was a really great opportunity to speak with some folks whose opinion and strategic insight I respect a lot, about where the Democratic Socialist movement is. So that's up on our Tuesday show. And I highly, highly suggest people check that out because, frankly, we talked a lot in that interview about things we've been talking about here, weekly on these Griscom streams for the past few years, is how to build a more punchy, a stronger, and a growing political Democratic Socialist movement in this country. But let's get back to the chat here. Welcome to all of our Twitch listeners as well. And please subscribe. Matt and I are always trying to get the Twitch rolling over here. So if you aren't already subscribed on our Twitch channel, definitely do that. We appreciate it very much. Um, Byron, going back to the question on Dan Osborne, my worry is that he might feel pressured from his honeymoon state if he is seen as tied to the Democrats. I mean, potentially, but also remember, being a senator, the nice thing there is you're elected for 6 years, so you have a lot more opportunity to define yourself as a leader, than just like a news cycle, which I think that would be what that is. Marco says, Uh, your thoughts on Kamala Harris being in a position as Biden's VP and proposing a pivot from supporting the genocide? Yeah, I mean, thoughts like, what do I think she should do? I mean, y'all know what I think she should do. She should oppose U.S. arms sales to Israel. She should support an actual ceasefire, and should pressure the Biden administration to end what it is that they're doing. What is absolutely clear about Kamala Harris, and what has been clear since she has been at the top of the ticket, is that she has the exact same politics as Joe Biden. And it's a fantasy to think that there's anything else under the surface there. She is a very typical member of the Democratic Party, which in my entire lifetime has been a party that is fanatical about second tier status for Palestinians, for discrediting Palestinian human rights. That has been the politics of the Democratic Party. That is the politics of the Democratic Party. And Kamala Harris is a member of the Democratic Party, right? So, there's no expectation here, and I don't think you should have any expectation that she has any interest in being anything other than a continuation of Joe Biden. Now, she's a little bit different because she has like a kind of need to present herself as empathetic. So she'll say, "I'm very sad about what's happening," right? But at a certain time, at a certain point, teary eyes and sad looks are pretty cold comfort, as thousands more children are being slaughtered by Israel. Now, what could she do? If she were to actually be serious about taking on the Israel lobby in this country, uh, she's going to have to take on a lot of very powerful forces, right? Not just today, but potentially in the future. And that would include her coming out and pressuring the Joe Biden administration, drawing a line between what is that she believes and what Joe Biden believes. Um, and I think that would be exactly what you would need to see, if you were to have any expectations that the genocide is not just going to continue for the next 6 months. Now, everything we've gotten from the Kamala Harris administration, Kamala Harris campaign so far has been that's going to be a continuation of the Joe Biden policy. And that's pretty much it. Um, and just to be clear, the continuation of Joe Biden's policy means thousands upon thousands of more deaths in Gaza. But I always appreciate hearing from you, friend. And as always, folks, feel free to jump in the chat with any questions. These are Q&A streams, hanging out a little bit. Please do at Left Reckoning so I can see them a bit easier. Kenta says, "Do you think Colin Allred legitimately has a chance against Ted Cruz in November?" Talking about the Texas Senate elections, which a lot of people don't know about because Colin Allred is a snoozer. I mean, Colin Allred is probably going to break records for how much money he raises. Um, I do not think that Colin Allred has a good chance of beating Ted Cruz, particularly because the Democratic Party has made clear that they don't think that Colin Allred has a legitimate chance of beating Ted Cruz. I mean that because if you look at the funding for that Senate race from the party itself, it's very limited. Now, a lot of money is coming into the Colin Allred campaign from donors, but not so much um, from the Democratic Party itself. I think that they think that the best pickup is going to be in the next cycle for that Senate election. Colin Allred is a Democrat who has said that he opposes Joe Biden's open border policies. This is somebody who has walked back even the kind of uh, wishy-washy stuff that we were getting in 2020 from some Democrats about the way that the United States conducts its border policy. Is somebody who has sort of shown himself to be very quick at turning his back on not we're not talking about progressive politics here, like just like Democratic Party politics. Thinks that if he can present himself as a moderate, slightly to the right of the Democratic Party, then all of these Republicans in Texas are going to turn their back on Ted Cruz. But the fact of the matter is, if you're somebody who wants to see people brutalized at our southern border and you are a voter in Texas, why would you want Colin Allred, who's not as strong on it as somebody like Ted Cruz? And that's the gambit that the Democratic Party in Texas has been doing my entire life since I was a kid, and it has ended in just complete failure. Where we have now had almost an entire generation of people in the state of Texas who have known nothing other than Republican domination of politics in our state. Um, so the Colin Allred campaign will be a big success in the sense that it's going to raise a lot of money. And a lot of the people who you might see on Twitter who like to tweet about Democratic Party politics are going to make a lot of money as consultants over the next couple months. But it will mean that we are condemned to more and more barbarity under the hands of Ted Cruz because the Texas Democratic Party has not been particularly interested in putting together winning campaigns in this state. Because, and I just really quick, I want to make this point clear to folks who might not tune in to Left Reckoning as much. The point of this is that because a lot of times people don't realize how political parties operate, particularly in southern states, right? Well, why would the Democratic Party not want to win an election? Because they are getting taken care of either way. There are people who have positions of power in the state party in Texas. There are people who get to advise campaigns in the state of Texas. And there are people who make money off of the campaign process. All of that money is swishing around Texas politics. I mean, running a statewide campaign in Texas is a very, very lucrative business for the Democrats and for the Republicans. So, I think people would probably like it if the Democrats were stronger, but that might mean changing their politics. That might mean not cozying up to the same group of oil and gas figures as they have been in the past, right? It would mean such a fundamental shift that, you know what, let's not try to actually deal with why the Democratic Party has continued to lose election after election in the state of Texas. Look at this, just on like a micro level. Talk to people here who do Democratic Party work, and this always will be off the record. But people say, hey, I tried to get involved in my county party, and there were serious barriers to entry for particularly young progressive people. And it's because there's a part of it that's it's a club, right? But there are people who are sort of protecting their realm, and they don't want to be pushed out, even after the fact they might have been losing for decades. And it's a very dysfunctional thing, unfortunately, here. And I think until some of that party apparatus changes in Texas, it's going to be really difficult. Beto O'Rourke, who did so well just a few years back, he had to build up his entire campaign operation from the ground up. everything, right? Because he recognized, and the state Democratic Party disagreed with him, that there needs to be a different strategy in the state of Texas. And because of that, all of the momentum and all the strategy and the knowledge that came out of the Beto O'Rourke campaign for Senate back in 2018 belonged to Beto O'Rourke and not the Texas State Democratic Party. That's a massive blunder and failure, and just shows to people who might not be interested in following politics at that kind of granular level the kind of fundamental issues that there are with Texas Democrats that are bigger than just messaging or ad strategy and things like that. All right, I apologize. I went a little long on that. Um, I'm gonna try to keep up with these questions. Please do at left reckoning so I can see them though. Our good friend Dale Martinez says all red ads are always just asking for money and saying I'm not Ted Cruz. It's crazy he isn't using the abortion ban. It is unbelievable how none of an issue that has been on at least on the ads here in Texas. You know, Colin Allred. Sorry, not to get back into this. Colin Allred's the Texas Tribune and Texas Monthly, two very respected publications here, you know, like just normal news organizations, media organizations, not organizations that have like a strong political bias. In fact, they always get called out as being too liberal by major figures in Texas politics. Now, that's a whole other thing. But they ran some articles recently. We talked about this on Left Reckoning 2 weeks ago or something about why is Colin Allred not having like campaign events? It's September and you're not seeing these kind of big rallies or anything like that. People are fucking excited about any kind of Democrat running in Texas because people don't like Ted Cruz. People, particularly in cities like Austin, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, are furious about what their life is like living under the abortion ban, living under just the absolutely clear corruption and grift that exists in Texas politics, right? So that's why generic Democrat is just a winner. Where most people like they're excited about that regardless of who the actual character is. And they have very little interest in actually seizing any of the kind of just inherited momentum that they have, preferring doing these kind of secret to small rallies where like the media is not present. It's a small group of people, usually, a leader, community leader here, maybe a union person there, these kind of one-on-one things. Anyways, a reporter came out, did a report on this. Hey, what's going on with the Colin Allred strategy? They didn't even say, "This is bad." Said, "Hey, this is what they're doing. It seems a little weird. Is it working?" And they interviewed different experts and folks, and some people said it was good and some people said it was bad. That's about as like down the line reporting as you can get. You had the ED of the Texas Democratic Party attacking journalists, telling them to get out of the way if they're going to publish lies. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Particularly from a party like the Democratic Party that was shocked and horrified by the attacks on journalists by people like Donald Trump. Here's somebody just doing a kind of talk to people, write down what they say reporting, and you're calling that lies. I mean, really unconscionable, frankly. Hey, David, what are your thoughts on how badly Arm Brown treats LeDrom James? Seems like a horrible relationship they got going. It is terrible. I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to see him soon, and I'll tell him what you said, Colt Dog, for sure. And this is the funniest thing. Soria Maria says Ted Cruz showed up my feed begging for money. I almost puked. I will say one of the funniest things. I gotta say it's very funny. Ted Cruz always runs has like no shame in running these kind of political ads. So Ted Cruz, the typical Ted Cruz political ad is, "I'm losing. I'm losing. Please give me money. Please give me money." And he did the same thing against Beto, and he's doing the same thing against Colin Allred. And if anything, that gives me a little bit of happiness. But Optimus Subprime says, talking about Colin Allred, his differentiation during his original House run was being pro Medicare for all. Regarding Allred, he's very much like Kamala. All right. PB says, David, how confident are you that the votes in Texas are going to be honestly counted, or is the problem more at the registration phase, the purging of the voter rolls? That is the problem. Um, so that yeah, I don't think that I don't think that there's any reason to doubt the ability of the Texas government to count ballots. I think that um, that's not a non-issue. The problem in Texas is that they are trying to make it more and more difficult for people to cast legal ballots. And that's been a problem for a long while. And they're upping the pressure on people. And what's happened recently is an attempt to not only sort of make it more difficult to vote, but to discourage people from voting, as we saw when they came and harassed that old woman in her house, sent cops to her house at 5:45 in the morning to rifle through all of her possessions because she was helping her neighbors register to vote. That's beyond just sort of, oh, voter ID laws or something like that. That's just trying to put an extra barrier on voting. That's actually discouraging people from participating in politics. And that is a major problem. That's a purposeful problem of thugs like Ken Paxton and our governor, Greg Abbott. But that's a different thing from us sort of doubting whether or not the state will be honest in counting ballots, right? Which is a very, very serious line to cross. Soria Maria says, David, do you believe, and thank you for the chat, my friend, says, David, do you believe that David, do you believe the arrogance of the Democrats lends them grossly undercounting leftists that will not vote for any of them? Um, I mean, I think that so I'm just trying to read your question one more time. Do you believe the arrogance of the Democrats lends them to grossly undercount leftists that will not vote for any of them? I mean, I think that the Democrats feel fairly confident that people who are voters who are on the left will show up and vote for them, and that's sort of been the case politically for a long while. They don't find that to be a group that's politically threatening to them in terms of those people turning around and voting for Republicans. I mean, people are going to you know get really mad about Jill Stein and stuff, and can have whatever opinions about that political project. We might talk about that a little bit later. Um, but more people who were Bernie voters um turned around and you know the vast majority of Bernie voters went around and voted for Hillary Clinton, and that's just something that has just been proven time and time again. This idea that like Bernie voters, sort of refuse to play ball after him losing, is just shown to not be true. Both in 2016 and in 2020, more so, for example, than Hillary Clinton voters in 2008 who didn't come out for Barack Obama after she lost, right? So the Democratic Party is not particularly worried about that class of voters, coming at them. Now they're a scapegoat for them when they lose, right? Which is why there's those kind of narratives. But like tactically, they're not too worried about it. Well, Justin Chen says they attended a Colin Allred rally that had around 200 people. Well, that's great. I mean, I'm not the only one who's saying this. That it's very clear that they're not having big rallies. I mean, this is compare this to 2018. It's not even comparable. And maybe they've changed their tune in the past week or so. I don't think that they're going to be doing much more than that. I'm sure they'll have a couple rallies here and there. But the Colin Allred race, I just, what is it? I don't think they're in it to win it, right? Byron Man says, "Sorry for spamming, but am I the only one disgusted by the Democrats courting the former Bush cabinet endorsements?" No, I mean, it's absolutely disgusting, and it tells you everything about how that party is thinking about politics and how they're willing, what they're willing to kind of sacrifice. There's no interest at this point, I think, in campaigning on much more than not being Trump. Even if that means sacrificing your claims to being for democracy. When you're having people who participated in an actual election steal in 2000, endorsing your campaign for democracy. It's really pathetic. Justin says, I think Allred's fate is still just tied to how Kamala does. Senate politics is all national now. Well, yeah, but I mean, do you think that? I think that there's no chance that Texas, is going to go for Kamala Harris, right? So you would need a state. I don't agree that Senate politics is national, at least in the state of Texas, in the sense that I totally agree that you're not going to get this split ticket voter where somebody's going to vote for Trump and vote for Allred in Texas, which is effectively the strategy of the Allred campaign at this point. You would need to have somebody who is winning on both sides, on the presidential and the Senate ticket, at least under Trump. I think that it is true that it changes the game, that the split ticket just feels so much more unlikely. Um, but like, if there is a window for a victory in 2024 for a senator, Democrat senator in Texas, I think that you have to be the one to sort of lift up the national ticket there. I don't think it would go the other way. Shiggity Shank, always good to hear from you, friend, says, do you think that Kamala's position on fracking in the most lethal military will end up causing any effect on her support, positive or negative? I mean, I think it probably comes out as a wash. I mean, I can't imagine uh, it, it being significantly positive for her, and at the same time, I can't imagine the negative side of it. I think that young people who are saying they're not going to vote for her because of those kind of things probably weren't going to vote in the first place. Um, and it's just disgusting. I mean, it's just this is why American politics is very disgusting, right? Um, at a certain point, like, kind of big questions like that seem to not matter in a way that is kind of bizarre. All right, here we go. Dan says, hello from Latin America. Left Reagan, would you agree that the United States is suffering the deterioration of the bipartisan system, is facing a political crisis like my second home of Venezuela? Um, I don't know, God willing. No, I mean, uh, I think what's really scary about American politics right now, I'll put it like this. What's really scary about American politics, or even Texas politics, but you can extrapolate this all across the country, is that you look at what's happened in my community in the past few years, right? We have had more mowing down of children in our elementary schools in the state of Texas. We are seeing women unable to get access to healthcare, to abortion in this state. We are seeing teachers getting harassed by lunatics. We're seeing working class people dying at their jobs because of overwork in hot and unsafe conditions, right? That's what's going on the ground. And then you look at what the government is doing. I mean, it's creating those conditions, or putting those conditions. It's like pouring gasoline on those conditions and lighting them up, right? Constitutional carry in Texas, the abortion ban here, um, trying to prevent city governments in the state of Texas from being able to pass common sense, basic protection, any kind of protections for workers, right? The Death Star bill. Read about it. Um, I've written about it extensively in Jacobin and covered it on this program. The Death Star bill. You can read all about it. Um, right. So you see all this, and like, that's the political scene in here. And again, put this all across the country, because the same thing will show true. And then you look at the polling. Do you support an abortion ban? No, right? There's people who do, but the majority don't. Do you support, no restrictions on gun ownership? Vast majority of people, even in Texas, different from other places, but even in Texas, support restrictions on guns to a certain degree. I'll tell you this right now. I feel confident saying it. Nobody in the state of Texas, other than bosses and construction company owners, has any problem with workers getting a water break at their job, right? And then you look even at something like Israel, what's going on in Gaza. You look at the way that the Democratic Party operates and how Democratic Party voters think about this issue. There's a massive disconnect between everyday people and politics. What Americans believe, what Americans want, and what gets given to them by both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. That's a fundamental crisis of democracy. And that's the thing that I think is the most scary about this kind of current moment, because when you start to feel like what you think doesn't matter, when you start to feel like your community is not represented, then you either become completely apathetic about politics, which a significant portion of Americans do, or you can become quite cynical. And when you see a democratic system like we have here that is regularly failing to represent just the values, the debates that people are interested in having, and the positions that people have, that is a very, very fragile system. So I don't know, about grand predictions. I don't think that that's probably accurate, to be fair, to say that America is like Venezuela in the '90s or something like that. But I think that you can see and feel a very, very palpable sense of a failure of our system here, and that's played into by both sides. Right. That's played into by the Republican Party in the state of Texas, which is raiding people's houses because they're signing people up to vote in a democracy. I mean, what the hell are we talking about here? Right. That's also something that is aggravated, that sense of democracy not working, democracy not really existing. When you have a Democratic Party, when the vast majority of its partisans, their argument is, hey, it doesn't matter what you believe, you sort of have to participate in politics this way, right? And there's a very cynical way, and I kind of, we've been doing a lot of stuff on Hal Draper for people who are less frequent viewers of this program. Matt and I have been reading Hal Draper, one of the great American Marxists, and he has this great essay. You can watch it, Matt and I. It's open to the public now. You can get access to all those reading series at patreon.com/left reckoning. But you can go and watch this video right after this, where we talk about this essay by Hal Draper called "Democracy as a Weapon." Right. And what he means by that is that democracy is something that's very precious. It's very precious for working class people and for Marxists. Right. It's something that's a core tenet of our politics. When you start to deny democracy or pervert democracy in order to quote unquote save it, right? Um, you are admitting to yourself that you actually don't believe in democracy, right? And in that case, he's talking about people who are worried about the red menace, right? The communists, the USSR, sort of overthrowing the American government from the outside in, right? Um, so, we should, ban certain kind of parties, ban certain kind of speech, all this kind of stuff, right? To save democracy. And I think he rightfully says, like, well, if you're saying this is the system and you can't even defend it, you can't even stand by in a time of crisis, you don't believe in it. And I think that's true. And I think that we see that in a lot of the kind of cynical arguments that we get about politics from people today about how we should, participate and engage in them. Because I think most people are, appalled at what we're seeing in Gaza. They're appalled by the things that the United States government does. They're appalled in the fact that, like, our government system and our ability to construct things in this country is extremely limited, right? And I think that's something that's shared. And then you see how differently people interact with politics. Some people fall out. Some people say, "Oh, we should continue supporting the same people who we've always been supporting, or continuing these kind of crises." And then you have, absenteeism, right? Oh, we'll show a message by not showing up, right? Versus any kind of affirmative project for working class politics, for democratic control of industry, of the world around us. Um, I think that creates more conditions for this kind of system to continue to falter and get weaker. All right. Yeah, and I didn't even get to. There's a couple of things that I put in the title. I want to talk about empathy and some stuff about the TVA. I think the debate we don't care about it. I'll get to a couple questions and then we can talk a little bit about um, some problems that are going on the left internally, the fights that we're seeing, and maybe my humble suggestion about having a little bit of empathy to get ourselves out of this crisis. But I want to make sure I'm getting to the bottom of these questions because I know people have been waiting. Good friend Del Martinez says, "What we want and what we get is the equivalent of a pizza party instead of a raise," and I think that's a very fair way of putting it. Well, JD Fox in the Twitch chat says Abbott has 4 billion tied to school choice, which fail. They're going to push school choice hard in this next cycle. They're dropping insane amounts of money. We talked to Darna Noor about Tim Dunn, about the big money behind the school choice movement. People could check that out. But JD Fox, that's another example. Like, there's no constituency for fucking charter schools. The constituency for charter schools are people who make money off of it and religious fanatics. To a certain extent, only like the activist class of those religious fanatics, because the fanatic class, it's just so outside of the world that they're just bumping around like a pinball in a machine. Now, the um, the money, there's a lot of money be made in privatizing a education system that is a public one, a good one, by the way. Here needs more attention and all those kind of things, but it is a testament to democracy, the public education system. It is something that we need to affirm and stand by. And nobody wants it. This is the joke has been that Texas will be the last Republican state to do charter schools because everyone in Texas has a lot of respect for their public institutions, particularly in rural Texas, where those are jobs, centers of the community, and they also have the football team. Now, they're trying to reorganize the makeup of Republican Party elected officials because they were unable to get the school choice through last cycle, and they're putting a lot of money behind it right now. And it's something that again is worth defending, and is another example of, like, even amongst Republican voters, the millions of things that they want. I'll tell you which one it's not: is school fucking choice, or what they're calling school choice, charter schools, privatization, vouchers. That's not what any of them want, but that looks like what the Republican Party is going to give them, right? And just another example of, you vote for one thing, you get another. That creates a lot of cynicism in politics. Nemesis Warlock says universities called the police on their student peace activists, and the media abroad did try to brand them as anti-Semitic. Oh yeah. Um, Good. Del Martinez, appreciate the chat as well. Says Republicans are now starting to call it a republic. Even Dick and Liz, endorsing Harris, made it a point to call it a republic. Yeah, they don't like concepts like democracy. Um, you know, Also sort of, you know, if you're from where they're from, very small state that has a lot more representation and influence than it should by the population. Yeah, you're probably going to be very fixated on calling America a republic instead of a democracy, right? Um, all right. Well, here we go. I'm going to get back to the chat. I think I'm at. um, Miguel says, should the left talk about a unicameral system now when wanting to discuss greater democracy? I mean, fine. Like, abolish the Senate. I think so. But we're going to have to build a kind of larger and a more powerful critical mass before we're able to tackle something like that. I think having a large platform is worthwhile, but you're not going to win on talking about that kind of a reform because you're going to have the trust of the people to be able to pull something like that through. And you don't have it right now. People don't know who we are. You know. All right. I want to talk a little bit um, about having a little bit of empathy. And this is the part of the show where I get really sappy. So bear with me. But if you are watching live and you have any questions or comments, I'll have the chat up. So I'll keep my eye up. And if there's something on topic about this, I'll bring it in. If not, I'll come back through later and we can talk about other subjects. But, you know, people should watch the conversation we had with Nick and Neil on Tuesday. We talked about where the Democratic Socialist movement is. A lot of the frustrations that we're having. I mean, it's very clear that like the Bernie Sanders bear hug strategy around Biden has had extremely limited results, particularly for our movement. Just anecdotally, you're seeing a lot of people rebranding themselves as progressives again. People who might have called themselves Democratic Socialists a couple of years ago. You're seeing some membership decline in organizations associated with this kind of political movement. Um, and it's a very worrying thing because back in 2018, it sort of felt like we were just going to be climbing, 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 climbing. When in fact there's a plateau and in some areas a little bit of a drop off, right? Some of that, I think, is the uniqueness of the Trump threat or politics or policy moment, whatever you want to call it. Did engage a lot of people. Um, and I think a lot of people are good and want to live in a better country than the one that we do live in. I think there is a part of it too that strategically a lot of folks sort of fell out of politics in the past few years. I think the left sort of had a really hard time. The socialist left had a really hard time trying to figure out how to do politics in a moment of mass mobilization. Talking about the George Floyd protests and things like that. I think sometimes a lot of left wing organizations and movements did a lot of tailism. You saw that with basically defund the police sort of enveloping almost the entirety of the socialist movement for a few years. A slogan and a tactic that proved to be massively unpopular with people all across the country. That was a tactical mistake, and as was, I think, a hope that that the Democratic Party was going to open itself up to a junior junior partner led by people like Bernie Sanders and AOC and et cetera. Because you saw the fangs and the knives come out for those folks. You saw what happened to Jamal Bowman. You saw what happened to Corey Bush. Real kind of mask off moment that even you call it a mask off. I mean, this has been kind of explicit. But anyways, you see these kind of tactical issues and tactical mistakes. And it is a moment where you need to go back and look at what has been done, what the strategy was, and whether or not it worked. Now, and I think that's exactly where we're at. If you've been watching this program, over these past 4 years, I mean, we started Left Reckoning. Matt and I launched Left Reckoning on January 6th. People forget that first episode of Left Reckoning was January 6th. So this has been the period of time that Matt and I have been sort of producing our own um, project and talking about the things that we want to talk about. And what we've seen over these past few years has been a resurgence in the labor movement, which is very exciting. Um, Ironically, the resurgence of the labor movement has come at a time of a decline in a lot of the democratic socialist politics. Now, let's be really clear here, and I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but you look at like the labor movement, particularly the big ones, and you look at who's working at those in those positions and kind of influential areas, and some even more middle of the road parts of these labor organizations, you might see some names that are familiar to you if you've been a member of organizations like DSA or things like that. So it's not that um, actually like our ideas are not influential anymore. In a lot of ways, some people are now doing politics at a very high and very influential level, and particularly doing at the level of like the most like resurgent and exciting parts of the American labor movement right now. That's a really good thing. So, anyways, I don't need to give an address about like the history of democratic socialism or anything like that. I want to talk a little bit about empathy and just trying to go into the conversations, the strategic conversations with which we're going to be having and need to have that can be very harsh and difficult, with a level of empathy for other people, because it's something that is, I think, absolutely critical in being able to maintain a growing movement over the next few months, years, even. Um, while also helping you understand what it is that you think and believe. Because when people hear me say empathy, what they probably are hearing is like, oh, yeah, don't get mad when you're in a debate with somebody. Yeah, totally. But I mean more than that. I mean, seriously, ask yourself why people believe let's lower the stakes a little bit, just talk about socialism. Why people who consider themselves to be socialists believe different things, right? Now, there is the vast majority of those conversations and thought patterns that people get into, which is they are fake and they are wrong, they are confused, or maybe even they're a bad actor. That is the vast majority of these kind of conversations. A socialist thinks this, and if they disagree with me or they have a different perspective than me, then they therefore they either don't understand the subject matter, or or they're bad faith, right? Now, are there a lot of people who don't understand the subject matter? Yeah, actually, probably most people don't, because I think a lot of people start calling themselves socialists as a kind of stand-in for being very, very liberal, right? Being to the left of something meant you were socialist, and that's how you got these kind of confused versions of like Karl Marx. That Karl Marx would have been, um, a kind of social justice warrior, or whatever kind of meme version of that as possible. Are there bad faith people out there? Oh my lord! You know, in the media, in the media, yes, there are. You know, I think you've seen some of it. But there are also people who might be operating, um, and thinking seriously about political questions, and might be ending up at a different place. And maybe to help people understand this, and I don't have a grand theory. This is just like a humble plea. Um, I could just talk briefly about something that was very eye opening for me. Now, I've been a socialist for a long while. I became a socialist when I was a bit younger, before the Bernie Sanders run. So I've seen at least a bit of the before times, and I think a lot of people don't realize how marginal those politics were at those times. And I think that anyone who actually has a desire to go back to left wing politics that we had in like 2011, 2012, is either confused, or very, very tactically mistaken. But anyways, that's how I learned about politics. I was reading magazines like Counterpunch. I read Jackman, obviously, when it first started coming out. I was reading a lot of Lenin. I was in some kind of political organizations, obviously very active in Occupy. And all of these different kind of activities sometimes made sense to me at the time, but now you can see, I can kind of very clearly see that there are all these different tendencies, from some kind of like anarchism going on in parts of the Occupy movement, Counterpunch, which is kind of had like an esoteric leftism, right? It wasn't explicit socialist or communist kind of publication. Jacobin was sort of at that point a hotbed of a lot of different radical ideas. I think sort of in the crucible building up what we might call like a modern democratic socialist perspective. A lot of different things going on there. Now, I absorbed a lot of opinions about the world from the people who I was reading, the people who were teaching me, the people who I was engaged in politics. It was, and one of those was being against, a clean energy system like nuclear power, right? like the radical left, particularly the environmental left in the United States, was always super against nuclear power. And that was just like that's a reflex. Didn't even know anything about it, just knew we were against it. And that was just something that I inherited from the people who came before me. And it was just a position that I held. And over time, as I started talking, particularly to union workers, people who work in producing and distributing electricity, I started to hear, oh, nuclear's not all bad. There actually might be some use for it here and there. And then actually engaging in doing a lot of that kind of research myself, talking to people more knowledgeable about me, about some of the questions and concerns that I had, and I realized that actually, not only is nuclear going to be a very important thing if we want to have clean energy and reliable grids in this country, but in fact, a lot of the people who were teaching me about this stuff um, weren't really telling me the truth. And all of these other leftists who I would speak to, who would tell me things like, hey, you should actually really reconsider your positions on nuclear power, that here, this, weren't bad faith actors. They were actually people who were trying to engage in a debate with me and tell me like and tell me the truth. I mean, when I first started working on the TMBS on the Michael Brooks show, I remember not putting emails, forwarding them along to Michael because people might want to come on and talk about nuclear power. I'm just talking about how far I've moved on that question. And I realized that, there's a lot of people out there who are pushing very bad faith anti nuke arguments that were just trying to stick anything to the wall. And it didn't matter why I would be against it as long as they could sort of convince me that it was bad. Right. And realize that there were like a lot of people who were making these kind of bad faith arguments. So, like, oh, waste is a problem. Oh, you're worried about that. Yes, it's a huge problem. Oh, future society 10,000 years in the future might be able to build a bomb from it. Right. Whatever they could see in you that might be tactically useful, we're doing it, realizing that that a lot of people had sort of pushed me um, into that position. Cynically, I would argue, um, that was a really bad thing to do. But that's something that pervades on the left. There's a lot of examples of this, right? Where you just want the people around you to like believe in your side and to back whatever it is. So it doesn't matter why they think it or why they agree with you. You're just sort of pushing it. That is a very kind of dangerous political tactic. And it's something that is constant in the American left, right? You see that in the way that people flip out if somebody sort of steps outside of the mainstream on some of these questions. And having a little bit of empathy on my end earlier would have led me to understand that, hey, well, these nice people who are talking to me about these kind of things, trying to speak to me as a comrade, as a friend, as a colleague. Maybe I should think about why it is that they think something differently than me, instead of just assuming they're operating from this. And if I engage with them and understand why it is that they're arguing for the things that they're arguing for, and I realize that um, they don't really know, or it's some kind of cynical personal reason, or who knows, right? Then I can accurately say, oh, that's a bad faith actor, instead of operating in a kind of blinded way that a lot of leftists do, where they're like, this is what the leftists think, and what they mean by that is this is what the majority around me are saying about a subject. Therefore, if anyone steps outside of it, they must be getting paid by somebody or being cynical. Instead, what we should do is say, hey, that's a different perspective than when I'm getting in kind of mainstream leftism, particularly online, and saying, why would somebody think that? Maybe if you have the opportunity to speak with them, you can ask them that and actually engage on a certain level, have a little bit of empathy to say, hey, somebody might see a situation politically different from me. Now, when you engage with it and they don't want to take it seriously, and they can be a reaction, everything is a possibility, is what I'm saying, right? Some people are confused. Some people are right and you're wrong. Some people are bad faith actors. Everything exists. So you can never have like a personal rule or law that is going to prevent you from getting bamboozled or confused, um, or led astray or anything like that. But what you can do is try to operate, at least to a certain extent, with a bit of empathy and have a bit of humility, that people on the left are wrong about a lot of things. They're wrong about a lot of things. And there's a tendency in this movement to fear being on the outside more than being wrong about a subject, because you get punished in this community and on left wing culture for having an opinion outside of the mainstream on things, right? You get punished, and everybody here knows that. So to avoid that, to maybe build a healthier community that's going to be able to withstand some of the serious debates that we're going to have over the next few months to years, forever, hopefully, you should be able to operate from at least a level of empathy that you can sort of understand and consider why somebody else might be having a different perspective than you. And at least, if not having empathy, have a little bit of humility, because nothing is crazier to me than hearing people talk about politics as if they've never been wrong about something. Past 4 years, you've seen people be wrong about a fucking lot. And there's a lot of people saying shit right now that they're going to feel very bad about saying in 6 months, because people get wrapped up in the news cycle, and particularly they get wrapped up in the electoral cycle. Um, so there's regrets there for folks. And sorry, that's the David soapbox sappy part of the program, but I had to get it off of my chest because the nuclear power thing. We can have that conversation more in depth later. People watch the program know we talk about it a lot. It was a really clarifying political moment for me, realizing that there were people who were just sort of saying whatever felt like it would work. And that, realizing that made me lose a lot of respect for people who I previously had a lot of respect for, because I realized I couldn't trust them, right? Um, on a lot of subjects. And yeah, all right. I would highly suggest, again, if people want more nuke stuff, you're on our YouTube channel right now. Uh, Go type in left, right, and nuclear power. We talked to Matty Haley at the we talked to Matty Hilly, who's a really great advocate for nuclear power, in depth about all the questions and concerns. I think 'cause people come into this because I'm just seeing the chats going on about nuclear power, nuclear power. I don't have the stamina or interest right now to like re-engage that because we're an hour into this and I'm probably going to leave in a second. But I'm not wanting to walk away from people actually engaging and having that conversation. So go into our YouTube show, watch our conversation with Matty Hilly, conversation with Lee Phillips, conversation with people like Matt Huber. And the reason that I was thinking about this was because really great piece here, um, really great piece here by a friend of the program, Fred Stafford in The Nation, about the Tennessee Valley Authority. Tennessee Valley Authority is an incredible testament to a different kind of future and potential in America, one that we need to defend. And you're seeing extremely cynical, organizations try to destroy public power in this country, something that we desperately need much more of. When they built the TVA, they called the TVA, you know, the TVA was communism in America, was how it was framed by the right. In a lot of ways, they were right because it was finding a way to break out of a private ownership system and actually build something for the good of the people. And it's not surprising that a system like the TVA has used things like nuclear power to provide energy for folks. I mean, here in Texas, we're very lucky to at least have some nuclear on the grid. Unfortunately, we need a lot more because as we sort of experience these ebbs and flows that come with having solar and wind, and particularly the cost of distributing energy across the state, you're very thankful if you spend any time looking at Texas's power mix, you'll be very thankful to see that nuclear solid line just sort of holding out and making sure that there's always a base load of power, keeping our energy up. People who live in Chicago, Chicago is probably the poster child of one of the great American cities powered on nuclear power, the energy of the future. It's been for generations. People don't even think about it. Don't even know. I bet there's people who who are listening in Chicago right now who don't even know. So there's a lot of hope there. We can have those conversations in the future, and that maybe is a good reason for y'all to come back and hang out with us next time. I appreciate all of y'all very, very much. We had a really great conversation with Nick French and Neil Meyer. We've been doing a lot of really great reading series in our bonus episodes. You get access to those at patreon.com/left reckoning. Our Marxist reading series in there have always been a lot of fun. Matt and I really get into a lot of great questions. Recently, I think we might make this public soon, but recently we did one on lesser evil voting, looking at some of the actual writing of a great American Marxist, Hal Draper. All right, we got one here from our good friend Soria Maria said, "There's nothing sappy about having compassion. Empathy is a superpower in these dark days. Shine that light." I love it. I appreciate um, I appreciate you very much. I appreciate all of y'all very much. If you're new, like and subscribe, share the show. We'll be back on Tuesday with the main show with me and Matt Leck. We'll be back this Sunday for patrons, patreon.com/left reckoning to get access to it. Also, huge, I can't do a Trump right now, but huge merch drop coming up. We're going to have some jackets, which I'm really excited for. Might be a couple weeks before we announce them. I want to make sure that everything is looking good. Thanks so much to Breadword there as well for the chat. But some really cool stuff coming down the pike. So y'all take care. See you soon and have a good rest of your week.